Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because what if the person laughing the loudest in the room is actually the most serious person there?
Yeah, that is definitely not how we usually think about it.
Right. I mean, we tend to navigate our lives with this really rigid mental divide. On one side, you have the heavy, austere realm of taking things seriously, the realm of rules, professional reputations, and basically doing the right thing.
And usually doing the right thing just because we feel like someone is watching us.
Exactly. And then on the other side, there's humor, which we culturally treat as like a total vacation from seriousness.
A complete escape, right?
But looking at the two philosophical essays anchoring our deep dive today, it becomes remarkably clear that our working definitions of seriousness and humor and where our sense of internal order actually comes from, they're completely backwards.
Well, totally backwards.
Because these sources argue that humor isn't the enemy of a serious life. In fact, it might be the only mechanism keeping serious people from just psychologically suffocating. So for you listening, our mission today is to shortcut your path to being truly well-informed on this. We want to find that sweet spot between taking your life seriously and not being crushed by it.
Which is such an important balance because, well, the problem starts with the visual stereotype we've assigned to the concept of seriousness.
Oh, the aesthetic of being serious.
Right, exactly. We reflexively picture a heavy air. Someone wearing a long face, speaking in hushed tones, keeping a very strict, guarded distance from anyone else.
I think they're at a funeral or something.
Yeah, we equate being serious with being fundamentally grim. But the texts we're examining today, they strip away all that aesthetic baggage. They define true seriousness not as a mood, but as a state of presence.
A state of presence. I like that.
Yeah, the core definition offered is simply a person knowing what they are occupied with. That's it. It's the act of being fully engaged with the reality and the weight of the present moment. You don't necessarily need to broadcast this miserable disposition just to prove you care.
Right, which that reframing changes the entire physics of the conversation, I think. Because if seriousness is just undivided engagement with reality, then the cognitive load of that engagement has to be massive.
Oh, absolutely massive.
Because the human brain just isn't wired to hold unbroken, high-stakes focus indefinitely. The tension would snap. It makes me think about cooking, actually.
Cooking. Okay, how so?
Think of seriousness as the main ingredient in a meal, right? The protein or whatever. And humor is the salt. The salt isn't the opposite of the meal. It doesn't ruin the meal. It's the balancer. It actually brings out the flavor of the seriousness.
Oh, I love that analogy. What's fascinating here is that the text makes a very similar mechanical point. It explicitly describes humor as a way for a human to breathe.
To breathe, wow.
Yeah, because when you are deeply occupied with a difficult truth, your cognitive and emotional defenses naturally rise. You tense up. So humor works mechanically to bypass the amygdala's threat response.
It sneaks past the guards.
Exactly. It creates this microsecond of cognitive dissonance, like a surprising punchline or an absurd observation. And in that brief moment, it takes your brain to reconcile the joke, the tension just drops, the mind loosens, the emotions relax, and communication eases up.
So used correctly, a joke doesn't obscure the truth you're dealing with. It momentarily lowers your ego's defenses so the truth actually becomes visible.
Right. You take a breath and then you pick the heavy load right back up.
But the sources are also clearly warning about what happens when we miscalculate this, right?
Yeah.
Like putting way too much salt in the meal.
Yeah, the text outlines two distinct failure states. The first is what happens when humor loses its specific tactical utility and just floods the system.
The total erosion of weight.
Exactly. If every silence is filled with a joke, if every word is lightened and everything is relentlessly mocked, the mind scatters. In an environment where every single thing is treated as a punchline, nothing can preserve its inherent importance.
You lose the capacity for that deep engagement we defined earlier.
Right. But then the second failure, state total rigidity, is just as destructive. If a person or an environment completely closes itself off to humor, the text notes that it generates gloom.
And gloom isn't just sadness, right? The texts describe it as an environment where thought itself becomes sterile.
Because the environment becomes obsessed with policing behavior. When laughter is strictly forbidden, every single word grows unnaturally heavy.
People stop taking intellectual risks because the penalty for a misstep is just way too high.
Exactly. The soul is suffocated. A human being simply cannot live by seriousness alone because the internal world requires space to stretch and recalibrate, just like the physical body does.
I actually have the translated couplet from the source here, which locks this dynamic in perfectly. It reads, "Humor grants the breath, yet without measure, It scatters the mind, seriousness carries the load, while humor helps the path unwind.
It's a brilliant summary. One handles the gravity of the journey, and the other provides the oxygen required to endure it.
But hold on, let's look at the reality of the modern world for a second, because the internet is just a nonstop 24/7 stream of irony, memes, and sarcasm.
Oh, absolutely.
So if humor is supposed to be this vital, refreshing release valve, why do we feel so exhausted by the constant sarcasm online today? We're joking constantly, yet nobody feels lighter. Is it really an escape, or are people just using jokes because modern life is legitimately overwhelming?
Well, the texts anticipate this exact phenomenon by making a really sharp distinction. There's a big difference between a release valve and an escape hatch.
Okay, an escape hatch.
Yeah. What we often see today is humor being weaponized as evasion. When the world is objectively overwhelming, the reflex is to use sarcasm to artificially create psychological distance.
To push the problem away.
Right. And when humor is used to constantly deflect, it becomes a mechanism to escape responsibility. Confrontation with difficult subjects is permanently deferred. We basically hide the issues that demand our serious attention behind a wall of jests.
So the exhaustion comes from the fact that the underlying problem hasn't gone away. It's like taking painkillers for a broken leg, but continuing to run on it. You aren't feeling the immediate sting, but the psychological background processing is still running, which just completely drains your energy.
That's a perfect way to put it. The text calls the result of this evasion the lightness of escape. And it contrasts that with the genuine lightness of being. You aren't actually unburdened, You're just distracted.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? How do we actually balance this?
Well, the sources suggest we can't rely on ready-made recipes or rigid lists of when it's appropriate to laugh. The balance is found through insight, which the text calls deseret.
Deseret. And applying that insight actively is what the text refer to as turbe, or refinement.
Right. Exactly. Refinement operates on a surprisingly simple but difficult diagnostic. It dictates that if a matter is truly vital, humor stands back. You let the weight of the moment exist.
But if a matter is actively suffocating the soul and creating that sterile gloom we talked about, then humor steps in to break the tension.
Right. And for the listener's own life, the relational implications of this refinement are massive. The source provides a brilliant way to audit our own behavior.
How so?
It warns that when humor begins to belittle another person, its mechanical function changes entirely. It stops being a tool for bonding or stress relief, and it becomes a corrosive agent. It dissolves trust and causes real injury.
Oh, wow. And I assume it works the other way, too.
Yes. Conversely, when seriousness is used to suppress another person, it doesn't build the mutual respect we often associate with strictness. It produces fear.
Wow, okay, so strictness masquerading as seriousness only builds fear. And sarcasm masquerading as humor only builds distance.
Exactly. A truly mature person uses laughter to lighten the psychological load of a room without devaluing the subject at hand. And they use seriousness to deepen a conversation without crushing the people participating in it.
They're constantly calibrating the two pans of the same scale.
Refinement is the ongoing, quiet art of making sure life doesn't become too heavy to bear, nor too superficial to matter.
The second couplet from the text really captures that relational harmony. It goes, if humor knows its place, seriousness begins to shine. If seriousness stands with measure, the human heart finds peace divine.
Establishing that balance outwardly in our relationships is a noble goal. But, it forces us to look at the underlying machinery.
Right, because we know we need this insight to balance our behavior outwardly with others. But where does that ability actually come from?
That's the transition into the second essay. You cannot consistently project that kind of calibrated insight into the world if you don't possess a stable anchor to generate it from.
Because if the external world is chaotic and other people's expectations are constantly shifting, you can't rely on your environment to tell you when to be serious and when to laugh. The balance has to originate inwardly. The text is basically asking, who are you and how do you behave when the camera is completely turned off?
Which is a direct challenge to how modern society engineers human behavior. We largely expect refinement to be generated from the outside in.
Oh, for sure. We build elaborate systems of rules, inspections, warnings, social sanctions.
Right, but Essay 14 argues unequivocally that external order only ever becomes permanent if it has a pre-existing internal counterpart. Without inner refinement, even the most draconian rule is bypassed the very second the threat of enforcement disappears.
It's like when you're a kid and there's a substitute teacher.
Oh yes, perfect example.
The moment the strict, permanent teacher leaves the room, the classroom descends into pure chaos. The students haven't internalized the value of a quiet, focused learning environment. They were simply complying with an external threat. Take away the threat, and the behavior vanishes.
And as adults, we like to think we've outgrown that. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we've really just built a society dependent on high-tech substitute teachers.
Oh, absolutely.
We rely on speed cameras to dictate our driving. We use software that tracks mouse movements for remote workers. We use read receipts on text messages to ensure social compliance.
We are trying to substitute inner refinement with external surveillance. We act orderly when the camera is on, and we scatter when it's off.
Exactly. But the source warns that this creates anxiety rather than trust. When you are being monitored, your brain isn't asking, is this the right thing to do? It's running this secondary, exhausting process of, how does this look to the observer?
Right. That split attention breeds massive anxiety. A camera doesn't give you peace. It forces you to perform.
The texts warn that external inspection can only ever support an internal balance. It cannot replace it. True inner refinement is the silent, stable equilibrium a person establishes when they are completely alone.
The standard you hold yourself to in the dark. The third couplet summarizes this brilliantly. Refinement is the hand held when no eye can see. An internal measure does not fall to chance easily.
Does not fall to chance easily. That phrasing highlights the stability of the internal measure. It is immune to environmental variables.
But conceptually, building that internal measure sounds incredibly daunting.
Oh, it is.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if we realize we can't rely on the external world to police us, and we have to become our own internal authority, how do we actually build this internal measure so we aren't crushed by our own unyielding expectations?
Well, the text notes that human nature has a tendency to drift toward two extremes of the self.
Okay, what are they?
On one end, an individual can become ruthlessly harsh with themselves. They police their own thoughts and actions with such severity that the inner world is exhausted. They literally buckle under the weight of their own self-judgment.
Like a tyrannical substitute teacher inside their own head?
Exactly. But on the opposite end, an individual can become excessively slack, forgiving every impulse and abandoning all standards.
Which weakens the will entirely.
Right. It reduces the person to a state where they can no longer take themselves seriously.
They become a joke to themselves. Their promises to themselves carry zero weight.
Inner refinement is the delicate navigation between those two failures. It refuses to maltreat the self with draconian punishment, but it equally refuses to neglect the self through apathy. And the texts identify the primary mechanism for this navigation as the human conscience.
Okay, but doesn't conscience usually just mean guilt? Like, culturally, we treat it as this nagging, retrospective voice that only ever speaks up to tell you what you just did wrong.
Right, that's the common perception.
So if conscience is just an internal mechanism for generating shame, it's hard to see how it acts as a balancing force.
Well, the text explicitly rejects that guilt-centric definition. Conscience is not merely a voice that speaks when a mistake is made. It is a highly sensitive mechanism of calibration.
Calibration, okay.
Right, yes. It also provides guidance when doing what is right. It isn't just a brake pedal that slams down after a mistake. It enables movement at the right time.
Oh, I see. So it's a steering wheel, not just an emergency brake. It helps you navigate the road rather than just punishing you for hitting the guardrail.
Precisely. And if conscience provides the steering, willpower provides the propulsion. The texts refer to willpower as the backbone of this refinement. But just as they redefine conscience, they offer a uniquely profound definition of willpower.
Because we usually think of willpower as brute forcing our way through resistance, right? Like white-knuckling a diet or forcing ourselves to work a 14-hour day. We define it by sheer output.
But the philosophical texts define it almost inversely. They state that an individual demonstrates true willpower not when they possess the power to do everything they desire, but when they make the conscious, deliberate choice to forego something they have the power to do.
Wait, really? Just choosing to forego something?
Yes. It is the conscious choice not to act.
That is a staggering reframing. Willpower isn't consumption, it's curation.
It is the ultimate flex of human agency. If you act on every single impulse simply because you have the capacity to do so, you aren't demonstrating freedom. You are operating as a biological algorithm responding predictably to stimuli. Pausing, evaluating the impulse against your inner measure, and choosing not to act is the mechanism that educates your free will. It ensures the individual does not live out their life as a prisoner to momentary whims.
So, bringing the insights from both of these essays together for the listener, a very clear picture emerges of what a refined life actually looks like and why this matters. The ultimate takeaway of calibrating your seriousness, leveraging humor as a breath, and building the steering wheel of conscience. It isn't moral perfection, it's consistency.
Consistency, yes.
Over perfection.
Consistency means taking your own words seriously. You honor your own intentions. When you build a track record of keeping promises to yourself in the dark, you naturally generate deep self-respect. And a person who possesses genuine self-respect inevitably projects that respect outward toward others, which is so crucial because, well, this raises an important question about our environment. The cultural norms are going to change. The acceptable professional behaviors are going to shift.
The laws will be rewritten. We live in a world where the external rules are constantly being erased and redrawn.
And that is the ultimate value of inner refinement. It's absolute portability.
Portability.
Yes. If your measure of right and wrong, of gravity and levity, is tethered to an external camera or a societal expectation, you are forever at the mercy of whoever holds that camera. But a balance established internally travels with you. Wherever you go, you carry that balance.
The final couplet we have seals this concept of portability beautifully. Balance established within finds its path without. Refinement walks with a human, never falling to doubt.
The internal work inevitably manifests in the external world. You don't have to force it.
It completely flips the script on how we are told to improve ourselves. But I want to leave you listening to this with a brand new thought experiment, one that builds on this camera on, camera off concept, but projects it into the very near future. We unpack the idea that society currently relies on substitute teachers' cameras, digital monitors, social surveillance to artificially enforce refinement. We act right because we know the camera is rolling.
The modern panopticon.
Exactly. But we are rapidly accelerating toward a reality of total algorithmic surveillance. We have AI systems that can monitor the tone of your voice on a customer service call to gauge your compliance. Sensors tracking eye movements, algorithms logging every digital choice. We are approaching a horizon where the camera is never ever turned off.
A world where external inspection becomes absolute.
Right. So if true inner refinement and the education of human free will only happen in the spaces where no one is watching, what happens to the human conscience in a future where the unobserved space goes extinct?
That is a chilling thought.
If we completely outsource our behavioral calibration to omnipresent digital monitors, will our internal steering wheels completely rust and atrophy from disuse? Or, and this is the flip side, in a world of endless, suffocating surveillance, will true, unprompted inner refinement become the ultimate, rarest superpower a human being can possess? Just something to mull over the next time you hesitate before clicking a button wondering who might be logging the data. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into these profound texts. May you carry that portable inner balance with you wherever your path unwinds today.